A sentence has to have these two things, a verb and a subject, or else it's not a sentence. Well, at least that's what we've been saying, isn't it? Well, I suppose it is. However, today we are going to bend the rules a bit. If you look at pretty much any sentence, you'll see that it's got a subject and a verb. And well, this makes sense because how else can you say that someone or something is doing something without a subject and a verb? Well, you've got to know the rules before you can bend them or even break them with any real confidence. Of course, there are some rules that we're not going to bend. We'll have trouble, for example, constructing a sentence without a verb. And in some situations, these ones over here, you might even have more than one verb. But today, I want to look at one really common way of using sentences without a subject, or at least without an explicit subject. Confused? Let me show you what I mean. And to do this, let's go back to an example we met in a video from a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember this?
Hast du die Milch?
Oh, ich habe vergessen, dass ich Milch kaufen musste.
Yeah, I said, ich habe vergessen, dass ich Milch kaufen musste. I'm the subject in both sentences. In the first sentence, I'm just saying I forgot. Perfectly okay sentence all by itself. But in the second sentence, I tell you not what I forgot, but what I forgot to do. Today, I want to think about an easier way to say the same thing, which is, if not better, a quicker and probably more usual way of expressing the same thing. Let's try this. Ich habe vergessen, Milch zu kaufen. Now, if you have any knowledge of English at all, you'll be very familiar with what's going on here. I forgot to buy milk. And it's that second sentence or clause that seems to break the rules because it includes a verb but doesn't really include a subject. We've got an object, the milk, and a verb, but no real subject. Instead, we're implying that it's the same subject in both parts of the sentence. Now, there's a couple of good things about this structure. Firstly, it's a shorter sentence, so we need fewer words, which means we can get our idea across more quickly and more concisely. And we only need the one verb in that second sentence. So if you're not keen on stacking up your verbs at the end of the sentence, then this might be a good option for you. And even better, we don't have to conjugate this verb. We just use the infinitive form, the form that you find in the dictionary. So that's why, I guess, they are called infinitive phrases. So let me show you some examples, give you a few tips and an easy and really useful variation. First up, here's a list of some of the more usual forms that will be followed by an infinitive phrase. I've split them up into verbs, like these ones, phrases with nouns, and some phrases with adjectives. And if you can think of any I've missed, let me know in the comments below. But let's start with the verb sich entscheiden, which is like the English verb to decide. Wir haben uns entschieden, eine lange Wanderung zu unternehmen. We've decided to undertake a long hike. Here we've got two parts to this sentence, two things that are happening. In the first one, there's people making a decision, subject and verb. The second part describes what it is we've decided to do. And you can see that we're going to go on a long hike. Except in this part of the sentence, there's no subject for the verb. It's just implied that it's the same people who are going for the hike that were making the decision in the first place. And this is important for us to be able to use this structure. The two parts of the sentence pretty much always have to have the same subject. I could say this in a different way and you'd see that the subject is the same. Wir haben uns entschieden, dass wir eine lange Wanderung unternehmen werden. Two sentences, each with their own verbs and the same subject in each case. And comparing these two sentences, you can see that it's easier and quicker to use the one with the infinitive phrase. But this only really works because the subjects are the same. And here it's worth remembering two things. Firstly, to make it really clear that we're working with two ideas, us having decided and then what it is that we have decided to do, I recommend always separating these two ideas with a comma. And secondly, our verb preceded by the little word zu is always right over there at the end of the sentence, which is pretty much where we'd expect it to be, since the verbs in a German sentence are generally going to be in either the second position or the end of the sentence. If you want to add in more information, then we just add it in the usual order. We could, for example, add in a time phrase or maybe even a place phrase and have something like this. Wir haben uns entschieden, am Wochenende eine lange Wanderung in den Alpen zu unternehmen. No matter what we add in here, the verb and the little word zu will be shunted along to the end of the sentence. Let's look at an example with the verb vorhaben, which lets us talk about our intentions. Wir haben vor, mit der Murtalbahn zu fahren. Here, we're signaling that we intend to do something. We intend to travel on the Mur Valley Railway. Again, it's our intentions and it's us traveling on the train. So the subject is the same in both parts. Another common verb where we can use an infinitive clause involves the verb sich freuen, to talk about doing things that please us. On this hike, we ran into, for example, a herd of goats. So I could say, ich habe mich gefreut, diese Ziegen zu sehen. So certain verbs are often followed by an infinitive clause, and some nouns with haben are too. Like, for example, this sentence that allows me to talk about what I feel like doing. Ich habe oft Lust, früh aufzustehen. I often feel like getting up early. Now this uses a separable verb, so the word zu slots in nicely between the prefix auf and the main verb stehen. Similarly, I could say, im Urlaub habe ich oft Zeit, im Café zu sitzen. Here, we can even add on another phrase on the end and say, im Urlaub habe ich oft Zeit, im Café zu sitzen und Kaffee zu trinken. And although they're not 100% necessary, I recommend using some commas just to make it clear how this sentence is structured. A final group of phrases, often followed by an infinitive clause, contain an adjective with verbs like sein, finden, or machen. And here you might see that we're breaking one of our rules. If you can see what it is, drop a comment down below. We've just come back from Austria, so I could say, for example, es ist nicht so lustig, so lang im Flieger zu sitzen. But on the other hand, I can say, es ist schön, in den Bergen zu sein. Or maybe, es macht Spaß, in Wien einkaufen zu gehen. In this last example, you can see that we have two verbs in the infinitive phrase, and it's the to go bit that's at the end of the sentence. So now that we have a reasonably good understanding of how these sentences work, these infinitive phrases, let's see if we can squeeze a little bit more value out of our hard work. Because with a small variation on this structure, we can give reasons for doing things. And since we do much the same thing in English too, it's fairly easy to understand. Here's an example. Wir sind nach Deutschland gefahren, auf ein Konzert zu gehen. If you look at this closely, you'll see it's virtually identical to the previous examples, with the exception of this little word This little word indicates that the second clause provides the reason for us doing the first thing. We're trying to describe our intention or what it is that we're trying to achieve. We do one thing in order to achieve something else. Well, what about this? Wir mussten durch viele Tunnel fahren, nach Deutschland zu kommen. Oder wir waren in Damsweg, dieses Fest zu besuchen. Oder ich bin früh aufgestanden, den Sonnenaufgang zu filmen. And at a rest stop somewhere in Germany, I came up with this example. Wir fahren von Passau nach Erlangen und sind hier stehen geblieben, eine kleine Rastpause einzulegen. But there'll be times where it's simply better to use a different structure. So remember, we'll only use these infinitive clauses where the subjects in both clauses are the same. Otherwise, consider using denn, weil, damit, or some other alternative. At this stage, it's probably a good time to remind you that there's lots more detail in our textbook, Bausteine 2. This video explains, for example, some of what we do in chapter 11. So if you're interested, you can pick up the textbooks Bausteine 1 and Bausteine 2 at the links in the description below. And of course, if you're finding these videos useful, consider subscribing to our channel, giving the video a like and maybe even sharing it with others. Also das war's dann für heute und auch für dieses Video. Danke fürs Zuschauen, alles Gute, auf Wiedersehen und tschüss.